Hi everyone, welcome to another one of our video interviews. This time around we're going to talk about home working and in particular the risks associated with home working, primarily since the start of COVID, which has obviously seen a huge rise in the amount of home workers we've got. And I'm joined today by three people from the HBP Group. So we've got James Royal from Cameron Computers, who's one of our account managers. We've got Dan Hewer from the HBP Group support desk. Dan's one of the guys that specialises in cybersecurity there. And Ryan Garlick's joining us as well, who heads up the IT support team for the HBP Group. So obviously home working isn't new. It's something that's been around for a long time, but we've seen a huge rise in it. So I suppose just to kind of set the scene, Ryan, could you just explain what kind of technology, how do people normally connect when they're working at home, either permanently or on a regular basis?
Yeah, sure, no problem. So we've seen a few different methods depending on sort of the company infrastructure that's in place. One of the common ones is having a VPN connection to, for example, a Sophos firewall or the firewall in the office. It might be a Draytech or another product. They'll have a VPN and they'll access file shares over the VPN. Alternatively, some people have the VPN and then connect to a PC in the office. We know a lot of people have had to sort of rush to working from home in some respects. So it's not always the best solution put in place. If they've got a particular application that they need to use in the office and it doesn't work over a VPN sort of natively, they'll connect to the VPN, remote into the machine in the office, and it's like they're working on the machine in the office. And that's one of the ways they'll do it. Sometimes, certain customers will have a shared server or remote desktop server, depending on what terminology you want to use, but that the remote desktop to that shared server, which 10 to 50 other users may be using that one server, but it'll have all your applications that you'll use for your business on a day-to-day basis, like Outlook, any line of business applications, that'll all be installed on there. So it'd be like working on your PC in the office, but it's a shared resource.
Okay. And you mentioned obviously that there was a bit of a rush. Obviously we were all informed of the first lockdown relatively quickly and everyone kind of had to move to home working. Did most businesses have that set up? Was it good to go, or did people scramble and put in kind of makeshift solutions?
Yeah, I think Dan will sort of echo my comments here, is that we had a lot of clients that were sort of blindsided by this in some respects. A lot of them had some infrastructure in place that allowed them to work from home. Some of them sort of remote desktop servers and multiple remote desktop servers, so they could withstand this new load that had been introduced because more people from their businesses were working from home. But then there was also other customers that had no form of remote working functionality in place. Maybe they had Office 365, so their emails they could have anywhere in the world, but their line of business application, you couldn't access that remotely. So there were some ad hoc solutions we had to put in place and get quite creative to get them working.
And to you, Dan, then how's that a problem for cybersecurity? Is it from a technology point of view? Is it from a user point of view? What sort of issues does that chuck up?
Yeah, so I think one of the big problems we start to see is that because there is no like one easy fit solution for all different companies that need to work from home. Each of these different options, like Ryan was saying, prevents a different set of problems. If you're allowing people to use their own personal devices to then handle company related data and applications, is that something that you really want to be doing? And a lot of the times you start running into GDPR problems even. The other problem that you've got is for things like where we talked in the previous video that we did about phishing attacks. One of the easiest ways to combat phishing is just having people around you that you can talk to and say, oh, does this look suspicious? Now that everyone's sort of sat in their home bedroom or living room or wherever they are, you haven't got that, so it can actually be harder to determine like the legitimacy of a dodgy looking email, for example. I think a lot of like we were saying, because a lot of these solutions that were implemented are done not necessarily with huge amounts of forethought, just because they need to get up and running sort of as quickly as possible. Sometimes some sort of configuration options can be overlooked that, if put in place, could make things more secure. So yeah, unfortunately there isn't a sort of easy fit solution to any one given company, really.
Okay. And James, I'm sure you talked to a lot of people around that period where people were rushing to get home working solutions in place. Mm-hmm. Would I be right to assume that their priority was get people working one way or another rather than considering cybersecurity, or was it on their minds at the time?
I would guess it was to get people working as quickly as possible. Anybody that was looking to buy a laptop around March time last year would find how difficult it was, how expensive they were getting. So any and all options used to get people connected to their data and email were being used. I had a look around some of my previous notes about what sort of devices people were using. We've got personal devices, we've got work dedicated devices, shared devices. If you've got a partner at home that's also working from home, maybe you're using their device, maybe you're using a homeschooling device. So I think it was the path to the easiest option to get people working was being used. And because of that, a lot of the work that we've been doing in this lockdown has been around companies that have got remote working in place, but are now trying to make it better, trying to make it more secure, make it work better for them, because they had to rush it through so quickly last time.
And is part of that being seen because this is potentially a more permanent solution for people, not necessarily because we none of us know when this lockdown will finish and when we'll all be back to some sort of normal, but is it a case of people are thinking, well, actually, maybe the way that we're going to work is going to change and people will want a bit more flexibility? Is that coming into their minds? Is that starting to drive a more, if you like, longer term mindset?
I think there's no denying that once we come out of this, the way that we work, the way that a lot of people work, is going to change. My role before COVID would normally go out and be seeing as many people as possible in face-to-face meetings. So I'd be spending 2 or 3, maybe 4 hours in the car a day getting to appointments. My car now hasn't moved for 2 weeks. So that way of working, I still be going out, I'll still go and see people, but the majority of my work, I think, will be delivered from home via hopefully a secure device. Well, no, insecure in our office it is, but for other people, they'll have to up their game in terms of security to make sure that everything is as safe as possible.
Okay, great. So when we start looking at these solutions, Ryan, obviously people are now starting to think, well, how do I make this secure? What's the first steps? What should an IT manager or someone that's in charge of IT either look at themselves or ask us to look at? What's their first steps to understand where they're at and what they need to do?
Yeah, so it'll be around sort of what resources can people actually access at home. So there's a couple of things that we can discuss and put in place. So, for example, Office 365, it's well known for being essentially accessible from anywhere because it's the same portal for every single end user. It's just portal.office.com. That's why it's so prevalent in phishing attacks, which is something Dan alluded to earlier. We could look at restricting access from certain areas. So something called conditional access could prevent people from logging in from different countries. So if your business operated solely in the UK and you had no sort of salespeople or anything traveling abroad, which probably definitely don't at this point in time in the lockdown, you could restrict that via conditional access to say only accept connections from the UK, or you've got other methods of sort of data loss prevention. So for example, you could have your antivirus prevents people from copying certain work to different locations. So rather than have it all on a home PC, it all goes through a dedicated work device. So it might be the remote desktop server. You have to connect to that to get your emails rather than being able to access it from any shared device. That does enhance security. And if I was an IT manager, I'd be looking to say, right, well, what can these people gain access to on a corporate level that I really don't want them to be on a device that's not necessarily protected as best as it could be, like a shared device?
Okay.
Yeah, just to add to that one quickly, I think one of the first things that companies should probably be looking at is, do they have the resources available to provide employees with like company devices? If they can, you've got a better chance of those devices being secure, and you know they're at least set up sort of standard across the board with whatever applications, what have you, on them potentially. And then you can allow them to do things like use the VPN and connect into their work PCs, like Ryan was saying. But if you don't have the resources for that, and then people start having to use their own personal devices, well, you should really think about how can we keep those personal devices as separate as possible from anything company related. And that's where the idea of, like Ryan was saying, with the a remote desktop server that you can connect to comes in. Because that way you don't actually have to have anything work-related on your own PC. And I think that can be sort of, it helps sort of keep that disconnect kind of.
So are we saying personal devices can be okay if they're configured correctly, or would we prefer not to be using them at all?
I think from my point of view, it's just you're adding another vulnerability potentially to your network if you use personal devices, because we know they can be shared around, you know, your family members and kids and things like that. You lose that sort of central control, which a lot of companies invest in with their products. So your antivirus is managed centrally, but if that device isn't on your corporate like central management, you lose visibility of it. So you don't know that it's got antivirus. Most companies have a policy in place where they can't install applications unless it's approved by an administrator. You lose that, so you could be installing, heaven forbid, ransomware on your own device. Cryptocurrency miners, things like that you're not aware of, or if you've got children and they're downloading a game or whatever it may be on that device, it'll come with loads of add-ins and things like that, and before you know it, you're sort of compromising your potential corporate network without even realizing it. But I think it's more about what steps can you take to mitigate that risk. Sometimes in the situations that we're in lockdown, you're not going to be able to remove the risk entirely. It's just making your network as hard and as secure as possible and mitigating as much as possible.
One thing that does come up, that can come up quite often, is if employees are using their own personal devices and that device then has some sort of a problem, whether it's related to work or not, say they do fall for one of these phishing attacks and then the computer gets ransomware and what have you, even if it's still separate from the corporate network, because it's their own personal device, who's then responsible for it if that goes up in flames, as it were? Is it the company because you're doing work on it, or is it the employees because it's their own personal device? There's some sort of interesting questions that end up having to be asked at that point.
Yeah. So is there an element here of education or even training for end users working at home now as well? Is it a different environment for them? Or do the same rules apply about being vigilant in terms of phishing attacks, or is there anything new they need to be careful of and more aware of?
Yeah, so I think all of the same rules certainly apply that would normally apply as if you're working in the office, but there would also be some sort of additional ones on top of that. So, so like we were saying before about being vigilant over emails that you're receiving, making sure everything's up to date, making sure you've got antivirus up and running. All of these things that would still be applied when you're in the office, but now it's on the sort of employee's head to do it. It's like their responsibility at that point. And it's also a case of, I think, the employees need to be, I guess, the additional training to understand the sort of systems that they're interacting with. That it's not just a couple of buttons that they're pressing and now they've got access to all their shared folders, but they're actually joining their PC to the corporate network in the case of a VPN. And the same with if you're using a remote desktop server, they have to understand that they're connecting from their PC to a server that's in the office, and the sort of risks that go along with that.
Yeah.
So go for it, Ryan. Go.
I was just going to add, I think, like Dan said, it's in terms of how they access the work resources. They're no longer going into the office and double clicking their icons for the line of business application. They've got another couple of stages potentially, and that has thrown a lot of people. But I think there's just training around how they now utilize their systems while they're working from home is the biggest thing. So it is about, I have to now go through those subsequent steps to get to what I normally did with one single step. I think that's the biggest problem that we've seen with sort of staff training, as it were, because at the end of the day, they're just trying to get to their work resources as quickly as possible. So they might install the application locally and then wonder why it's not working on their home device, and then they've got to connect to the VPN and such to get it working again. That's the sort of thing that sort of people are missing out on at the moment.
Last time round, James, you mentioned, I think your expression was that the perimeter of a corporate network has gone all wibbly, I think was your term.
Wibbly or wobbly, one of the two.
Wibbly or wobbly, one of the two. And I think one of the things you were referring to there was around data as well, in that actually we normally have our data secured in a nice safe perimeter, but now by using personal devices or people even working from home, there's an option then to start saving data elsewhere as well. Is that a problem? And if so, how's that better managed?
Definitely, it's a problem. As soon as you start moving data out of the corporate control, then it's not being backed up, it's not being protected, it's open to many more threats. How you can control that, that'll be a technical question for Dan or Ryan, but basically enforce the policies that users can only save their files into secure locations, be it OneDrive, be it SharePoint, or be it file shares back in the office. And I think, again, the lads mentioned it there about education. We've had to force a lot of users to work from home, and maybe some of them just don't understand how they connect in and what the risks they're facing when they are connecting in. So I think that education piece and awareness, again, I mentioned it in the first video, awareness is really, really key, so that end users are aware that it's their actions which can cause, even by accident, not malicious activity, but by accident, can cause the threats to develop.
So if this is the first time maybe someone's actively thought about this, maybe they're watching our video and thinking, do you know what, we've not given enough consideration to all these home workers that are about, and maybe we don't quite know where people are saving files, what devices they're truly using. What's the next step, Ryan? What's the first thing? How can we help, or how can they help themselves?
Yeah, so we just need to obviously have a review of their system, see what sort of connectivity we can make a smoother process for them. So, for example, they might be using, in a rush because they got set up at the start of lockdown, they might be using a VPN and remote desktop to a PC in the office. It might be a better case that, we set up a remote desktop server for them and they just have one icon that they need to click on from home and it connects them in. It just might be an easier way for their end users to start working, because at the end of the day, if they're not as efficient, not as effective working from home, their company's losing money. Technically, their salaries are being paid and they might not actually be able to work as they were in the office. So that would be one of the first points. I'm a big advocate of the remote desktop server at the moment. It's helped us out quite a bit, and they're easier to secure and easier to control. It's all central.
And Dan, would a similar approach be to review the cybersecurity at this stage as well?
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of the policies that a company might have in place will, for the most part, still be the same, but it needs to be looked at and reviewed with the consideration of where home devices fit into that. And like I said earlier, I think one of the sort of easiest discussions to be had should be, well, can we provide these people with company devices? Because as soon as you can do that, a lot of the problems essentially go away. You can also have the discussion of if people do have to use their own personal devices, do they need anything more than things like SharePoint, access to files in SharePoint or OneDrive and the Office applications? Because if they can get away with just that, then, well, there's no need for their device to connect into the network. They've already got access to everything that they need without having to sort of breach that corporate network barrier, as it were.
Brilliant. Right, so as we come to the end, then sum it up for us, James. What should people be thinking about, and why should they do something about it, really?
Okay, I'll take the last question first. They should think about it for all the reasons that we outlined in the first video, that if your company or your business is hacked, then the implications go wide and far in terms of not being able to deliver the service to your customers. You've then got potentially financial penalties. You've got lack of confidence from your markets. There's many reasons why you should be doing something about it. You should also protect your endpoint so that your users feel as safe as possible. Because one thing that we haven't really covered here is how difficult it can be to be a home worker, particularly if you're not used to it. Working within an office environment, as Dan mentioned earlier, you're talking to people, you're more focused. Working from home, you're on your settee, maybe you're working at your kitchen table while your kids are homeschooling, while things are going on around you. You're going to be a lot more relaxed and therefore a lot more open to attack. So awareness, again, is really key for every user, as hard as it is to work from home sometimes, to make sure that you're vigilant, to make sure that that email that's come in is absolutely correct, to make sure that you're not downloading stuff, to make sure that your kids or even you aren't downloading stuff on your machine that could cause a problem. So it's a difficult thing to say what one fix could help all of this. I think it's that layered approach and everyone being that extra bit of vigilant to make sure that they're not doing stuff they shouldn't be doing. I think that's all I can say really on that.
Brilliant. I think a lot of people would disagree with you about being relaxed when they're homeschooling their children there, but I think might be a different word they'd use on that one, James. But I think we get your point on it. So I think that's great, guys. So ultimately, what we're saying is it is brand new territory for so many businesses, and that's what makes it a big challenge now. But actually, the solutions, although it's not a one size fits all, there's certainly a solution out there for everyone to make that as safe and secure as they possibly can. So
yeah.
Thank you very much, everyone, for your input and your opinions again. And hopefully we'll be back soon with some of you guys on some next videos. So thank you very much.
No problem at all.
See you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.
Thanks. Bye.